Welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, where I am joined by Concordance and HogTieChamp. As ever, we will be interested to hear any of your views about any of the topics we're talking about, or any that you would like to raise yourself. So we're going to kick off, though, as I say, with an update on the abortion issue in Texas, which we discussed on the last show, and Concordance is going to lead us off on that. Concordance, over to you.
So you may recall last show we talked about Wendy Lucas and her rather courageous stand against the Republican majority in the Senate in trying to block a bill from being passed that would outlaw abortions past week 20 and that would restrict the number of sites that abortions could happen within Texas at any point to only 5 sites in the entire state. Shortly after her successful filibuster, although there were some controversies around that, the governor called for a special session, pulled everyone back, and then just a week later, basically, it's passed the Senate, passed the House, and now it's going for signature. So if it isn't already, it will be law immediately.
Could I just ask you, because I'm not familiar with the process in America, a special session, what does that mean? It's just a session where they can get it through without any potential for filibustering, or what? Can you explain that a bit?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at government, but as I understand it, there are regular sessions where they are required to meet. It's on the calendar and everything. If they call a special session, they convene the Congress again in order to accomplish some particular goal. You know, normally they have a congressional calendar that gets filled up with, you know, I have the floor for this many hours on this day. And a special session is to deal with a particular issue. For example, in this case, a bill that died, that's one of the rights of the governor, is to call for a special session and bring them all back together. And you don't get a full quorum, you don't get enough people, but it's often used to push through a particular bill. But you and I were talking about maybe a little bit further down the line. I'm upset about how it was done. Clearly, there were a lot of protesters. In fact, there were a lot of protesters that there was some attempts to silence them from being "quote unquote" disruptive, and I found that very disturbing. You know, I do have a hard time fighting too hard against permitting abortions past the 20th week of gestation, unless there are some extenuating circumstances. You know, at 20 weeks, you really do have a small human being that's potentially able to survive. I think that we could certainly debate this and discuss it, but I'm not entirely opposed to the idea of having some restriction on the point at which we can terminate a pregnancy. And 20 weeks seems like a reasonable compromise between the people that don't want any and the people that want to be able to do it up until the day before delivery. And I don't know that there are that many extremists on either end. You know, I'm afraid we don't have enough dissent on this panel on this topic. What do you guys think? 20 weeks? The baby has eyes, ears, noses, or fetus has eyes, ears, nose. Meconium is formed. Lungs are there and not quite functional, but the baby can survive at 20 weeks. A very low chance, but it is possible.
Well, I'm going to agree with you that this our issue, no matter where we go with this discussion or any other discussion when this topic comes up anywhere, it always comes down to a where do you draw the line issue. And you know, some people will try to come up with objective criteria by which to set that line. The only thing that I would disagree with what you just said, and it's maybe a bit of a semantic distinction, when you're saying you think the 20 weeks is sort of, you know, a fair compromise. That might be the exact words you used, but, you know, between the people who would like to see abortion rights available and people who don't want to have any abortions at all, there is no fair compromise. That's the problem. Like for them, where do you draw the line? The line is drawn at we just don't do this.
It's like tossing a bone to the people who would rather ban all abortions, but you say we're going to ban late-term abortions. And I think there's more than just a semantic difference there. The reason why you might want to do a late-term abortion are very different than the reason why you might want to do an early term abortion. Late term is where you start to discover medical issues. And I think that is very much a different issue than someone who uses abortion as a last ditch, I hate to say contraception, because obviously it's not contraception, but as a birth control issue. When it's a 16-cell embryo, you can do whatever you want to with it as far as I'm concerned. 16 cells to me do not a baby make. But at the point at which you've got a brain and the ability to suffer, you've got a more sticky issue. At that point, I don't think you can use the termination of that late-term pregnancy as a birth control issue. And I don't know that that's really what people are arguing for. I think there's more to do with the principle of the thing. Which life do we value the most? What power do we give the government over the independent, what do you call it, the liberty of the woman? And those are sticky issues too. But I have to say, it makes me a little squeamish to think of late-term abortions, especially if the reasons for the abortion are, to me, inappropriate. Maybe a case-by-case issue.
I think before the show started, we were all pretty much in agreement that in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to rely on abortions. But of course, we don't live in an ideal world, and therefore we have to make these difficult judgments. My personal view is that I think, along with yourself, HogTie and Concordance, there is a significant difference between the reasons for having late-term abortions, which tend to be medical reasons, and those for justify early-term abortions. It is a troublesome issue, I think, and in general terms I'm opposed to it, because I think in a lot of cases it is used by people who are ill-planned. They haven't thought things through. It happens by accident. I mean, the very expression, "I fell pregnant," makes it sound as if it's an accident. No, you had sexual intercourse without contraception. You didn't fall. It wasn't an accident. It was a not bad. And the fact that people are at times using abortion as a form of late contraception, I think, is disgusting.
I don't think that's all that common. I really don't. I think there might be a few cases where the pregnancy is not discovered until very late term. I'm sure that happens. In a lot of cases, where abortions are used is in reducing twins and triplets that may pose a threat to the mother. And in the cases of genetic disease, where you've got a child with such profound medical issues upon birth that bring them into the world may not be a nice thing. And again, I almost think on a case-by-case basis, I'm okay with those things. I think it's more the principle of something that never happens, a straw man here, that people are, aborting their babies a week before delivery. I doubt that ever happens.
Exactly.
But
what
I would
was
hate to
say pardon me. It's definitely a straw man to say to sort of paint this picture that people are, spending 8.5 months trying to decide whether they want to have this baby, and then decide, like you say, the week before it's born, that no, we're just not going to have it. I mean, that is really not the meat of the issue here.
What is the legal period up until which an abortion can take place in Canada? I think it's 24 weeks here. Concordance mentioned 20 weeks in Texas. What is it in Canada? Do you know?
I'm actually not even certain, but I know it's comparable. I believe it was at 17 for a while, but then was moved to a later date, not that recently. But I actually don't even know offhand. I mean, what does that even work out to in months? I mean, you would be talking about, an embryo that would be of a significant size is one of the issues. I mean, even with the 20-week or 24-week, wherever you want to put it, I still wonder what the rational basis for it is, for saying, well, here is where there's a good cutoff.
I don't think there is.
I do think there is.
I mean, it's like, what should the age of consent for sex be? I mean, society sort of like makes an assessment of the average age at which it's likely that someone has got sufficient maturity to make an informed consent decision about whether to have sex, and they say 16. But in reality, what happens between being aged 15, 363 days, and a couple of days later when you're 16 and it's legal? That absolutely nothing. It is arbitrary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was intrigued by your point that you sort of briefly touched on, was about the fathers in these situations, that generally speaking, the mother almost has an unfettered right to decide whether she's going to proceed with a pregnancy, which is kind of a strange way of putting it too, because women don't choose, yes, I'm going to go through this effort of proceeding with the pregnancy, or I'm just simply not going to be pregnant, right? I mean, the active decision there is to go forward for a procedure or a medication that would actively end the pregnancy. So it's probably the wrong way to put it. But in any case, I'm not sure how that's been dealt with.
You know what? I think the woman. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
My audio keeps lagging out. I don't mean to interrupt. I think the women does bear all of the medical issues around the pregnancy. There may be a legal right to, I don't know how you would term that, the offspring, but it seems to me like the woman does have a definite privileged position when it comes to bearing the medical risks of carrying to term. I think that has to be included in the law. Yeah,
and then this is something my opinion has changed on considerably over, I'm going to say, a 15 or 20 year period. I remember when I was a fairly young adult going to university, there was a case here in Canada where, not here, it was in, I believe it was in Quebec, it was definitely in Quebec, might have been Montreal, but where a woman was pregnant in a very difficult relationship. The husband didn't know she was pregnant. Eventually he came to find out, the husband, the boyfriend, and he ended up suing, getting injunction against her having this abortion. And people were up in arms about that, like they're going to delay this elective abortion while the court was, as quickly as possible, trying to figure out whether or not this guy had a claim to some sort of control over whether or not this fetus was going to, it's not a fetus at that point, embryo, was going to survive. And eventually lost that. They ruled that the mother's rights to determine what's going to happen with her body prevailed over, this isn't over the rights of the baby, it's over the rights of the father in that situation to make determinations related to the health of an embryo that's in her body. Now in the meantime, she'd actually gone to the States and got an abortion anyway, so it didn't matter. And if I could slip in a little bit of trivia about this too, this situation, this same guy had later moved to Edmonton and got into another kind of weird relationship situation and estranged from that one. He was a private pilot. He got into his airplane and he flew around, I think it was Castle Downs in northern Edmonton, and when he ran out of fuel, he just crashed his plane into her house, making himself, for many reasons, not one of the best boyfriends to ever have. But in any case, I'm wondering how other countries have addressed this issue. I think it's pretty much settled here in Canada that the father doesn't really have a significant claim to some sort of power over deciding on health decisions for an unborn baby, and it's really such a weak claim that pretty much every other interest would trump it.
Yes, and that's the position that the courts have arrived at here as well. The father effectively doesn't have any say in the matter.
Yeah, I used to hate. When I first heard about this, I railed against it. I just thought, oh, that's terrible. Like, this guy's a father and he has a right to whatever. But I've sort of softened my position on that in the sense of, and I think I would say grown up, because I've realized that, what did he do? What makes him a father, right? And not to be indelicate about it, right? But he had sex with somebody, unprotected sex with somebody. That's not what a dad is, right? He doesn't, from copulating with somebody, somehow earn or merit the right to make healthcare decisions for another person, whether an adult woman or an unborn person. In hindsight, I find it kind of a silly notion.
It's so close to the issue of forcing someone to do something with their body. It's so close to slavery, I think, in a lot of legal ways. Compelling someone to do something because someone else wants it, that may involve risk, feels very much like an indentured servitude or slavery type of situation. I can imagine the courts not wanting to rule in that favor, even though I think that your old position had some valid points. It does trample on the rights of a father. Not that the mother does all that much either, besides allowing a natural process to take part inside her body. She's not a mom yet. She's just a gestating mother. Anyway, same types of issues.
Just to sort of like sum up our positions, all three of us can see that there are occasions when abortions should be allowed. I think we all agree that ultimately it's a mother's decision as to whether to have an abortion or not. And we reach these reasons based on what? Because clearly, and this is what I want to move on to next, we don't base these on religious reasons. So why do you think that, both of you, why do you think you've reached the conclusion that you have?
For me, very much, it's stepping away from the religious thing. I think when I was younger, this used to be such a simple issue for me. You know, having this discussion, for example, is a little difficult because, you know, as we say sometimes, I said earlier, well, on what basis? What are, you know, upon which criteria do we establish this particular cutoff? You know, when you try to come up with logical basis or evidence basis for your different decisions. And it used to be a lot more simple for me. I understood and firmly believed without question that the union of a sperm and an ovum is a person, is a human being. And, you know, there is a simplicity to that view. It's not complete, because actually that would never be a person, right? There are a lot more. If you say, well, a sperm and an egg are sufficient to create a person, well, not really, because that also requires the trip down the fallopian tube and the implantation, successful implantation into the uterus, and the not rejection, and then over the next few weeks, a very critical period. There are a lot of ducks that still have to be in a row before that is to be considered a person. It wouldn't even be appropriate to call that union of cells a potential person, as you quite often hear people say, because if they're a potential person, well, then you know what, any sperm and any egg anywhere is potentially a person, right? So yeah, for me, I think that where the big change comes from is moving away from the religious dogma that had sort of shaped my earlier view, and then realizing I was sort of left with, okay, so what is my view now? And you have to then sort of say, okay, well, how am I going to develop a view? On what basis should my view on this issue be developed?
Yeah, I'm just so glad we aren't stuck to the, you know, strictly liberal position on this. I suspect that the three of us here represent not that atypical a viewpoint among non-religious people on this issue. It's complicated, and there are issues where at some point you could be talking about the death of, you know, an organism that can feel pain, that can have conscious thoughts. You know, if, at least as compassionate about it as we would be someone who is in a coma, which is to say, not be flippant about it, not to do it unrestrictedly. And I hope I'm not proposing a pure straw man here that people are even going to do that, but I think that the law has to respect the value of life, and where we can generally agree to divide the line between something that is sort of pre-conscious, pre-human, and something that is distinctly a new human. And it's not, I don't think it's as simple as the extremists would like to make it sound. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with either extreme position. I don't particularly like the idea.
Although, if you really want to read
fighting
something
for the principle of abortion at any step versus the principle of not ever being able to destroy even a. Go ahead.
Oh, if you really want to read something if you want to read something that'll really challenge your thinking on abortion, especially if you're opposed to abortion, but even if you support abortion rights, but like me, you're not really comfortable with the number of abortions, really wish that, I mean, I really wish we just didn't do abortions. I wish we just didn't have them. I'm not saying that people shouldn't have access to them, but, you know, you know, I don't know. I wish we didn't have ambulances, right? I wish we didn't have a need for ambulances, I guess is one way to put it. But if you really want to challenge your thinking, on no matter what side you're on, read or even watch the short documentary Freakonomics. Levin and Lewitt, something like that. It's these two economists that have done some great analysis about economics and social trends and whatnot. And they have an explanation for the decrease in crime that's been observed over the last 30 years. And they link it to the change in abortion availability after Roe v. Wade. And I guess I may have given away their punchline by saying that, but I don't know that I could craft their argument as well, sort of, you know, here on the Magic Sandwich Show without taking up 20 minutes to do it. But seek it out. I mean, there's web sources that have kind of re-summarized that material. and they've actually kind of framed abortion availability, not abortion itself. Like, it's not like a pro-abortion thing where, hey, you should go get an abortion, but it's showing how it's possible to view a society as being enlightened when they empower people with the equipment, the technology and whatnot to help decide when they're going to have kids. Again, I'd still rather that it was more straightforward things like, birth control and the types of contraceptive that would prevent implantation of an embryo, rather than saying, well, we'll let it implant and then we'll surgically remove it, which I really am not a big fan of. But this Freakonomics is a great read for a number of reasons. One really quick thing, I totally forgot I wanted to mention this. I made the comment on the last show about the Lord of the Flies style legislature that goes on in Texas. And apparently we had like 3 people from Texas on the show last time. So I'm making fun of them. But there's now that woman, I wish I could remember her name now. Everyone's seen it on YouTube. But there was a woman who came to speak at the hearings during the special session, and they dragged her out in handcuffs. I will hunt down the link for it, but I mean, the whole notion, like I say, it's just a Lord of the Flies caliber legislative process where somebody comes in and she was talking and she mentioned chlamydia and everybody got uncomfortable and it was like, take away the speaker's conch, and they dragged her out kicking and screaming. It was pretty funny.
We're moving on then to Mr. Zimmerman, and I think probably appropriately I will bring in our first callers. Concordance, tell us a bit about Mr. Zimmerman.
Well, I don't think we can focus entirely on Zimmerman. It's the story of the shooting of Trayvon Martin, who was a 17-year-old black child, man. I hate to be in any way prejudicial in the term I use. He was returning from buying some Skittles at the local gas station, and Zimmerman followed him. Zimmerman, by the way, and this maybe come up during our discussion, is of mixed race. He's, how would we describe it? He's German, European on one side. He's South American and African on the other side. It tends to be portrayed as sort of Hispanic. I believe he's Peruvian, Afro-Peruvian on the other. But he was part of a neighborhood watch, and the allegation is that he racially profiled Trayvon, who was wearing probably a hoodie and walking through the rain, and he thought that was a bit unusual, and he had been on this neighborhood patrol, and he got out of his car. He had a loaded gun in his pocket, and in the ensuing scuffle, he shot Trayvon through the heart, I guess, and he died within a few minutes to 30 seconds. And they didn't arrest him. They didn't bring charges against him. There were, by the way, he had a broken nose. He had 2 black eyes. He had scratches or rather contusions on the back of his head to suggest that he had been injured both with punching and having his head thrown against the concrete. They didn't bring charges against him immediately. It took him a full month to bring, I believe it was second-degree murder charges against him. And he was just recently found not guilty. And the response has been accusations from a lot of leaders within the black community that, if the races had been reversed, that we would now be watching Zimmerman going to the electric chair, or at least 25 years in jail. So it's very much about racial profiling. It's very much about race and justice, and being framed a lot of different ways. It's led already to some pretty angry responses, and I'm kind of curious to see what people have to say.
Well, I mean, I don't think that he should have. A lot of my black friends say that it's a racial issue. I personally don't think it is. I don't think there is enough evidence to point to the fact that it was racially motivated. In fact, a lot of the media likes to sort of they like the hype that arises from a lot of these issues, when in reality, the majority of deaths of African Americans from gun violence has been by other African Americans. Over 95% in the last 30 years, actually. So, I mean, it's way blown out of proportion, and I mean, a couple days ago, a 36-year-old man was murdered by 4 black gang members, and no one covers that. This case, like, the media likes to pick one case and make it receive national recognition beyond what, it would normally get.
I'll tell you my own take on this. I'll just tip my hand. I think that part of it, at least, was a cultural gap, and I don't think it's necessarily a race gap. I think if it had been a young Hispanic man in a hoodie with his pants down around his hips, that probably would have elicited the same response. I think that we associate this sort of urban culture with black people, but I think that you and I walking down the street, seeing someone dressed a certain way, regardless of their race, they clearly identify with a type of culture or with the cultural element within our society that is known to be responsible for a high percentage of violence that forms street gangs. If someone were wearing all blue, and they had the characteristics of a Crips or Bloods or whatever kind of gang signs, it wouldn't matter what age they were. If they looked physically threatening, it wouldn't matter what race they were. It wouldn't matter even necessarily if it were a woman. It's the kind of costume, the advertisement that they put on that identifies them with some element of subculture. And while I think race plays into that, it's not the defining characteristic. To me, it was a matter of he looked like a gang member, and this guy made a really bad decision, and that bad decision led to the death of a young man who could have turned his life around, could have done any number of things, and life was lost. But I'm not sure that it's necessarily strictly racial profiling as much as it is cultural profiling.
HogTie.
Concordance took my answer. That's exactly what I was going to say. That, the race factors into it a little bit, more so the culture. If you saw a black man in a suit, or just, I don't know, he's right. We have some where I live, and a lot of white guys that will wear like the MMA style sparkly shirts and chains and whatnot, and they're all tough guys that you don't want to bump into because they're going to punch you in the face. It's like, we don't really have many Hispanics where I live, but I think it's, as Concordance was saying, it's the advertisement. It's the way that you present yourself. I think where it gets a little weird is that I don't know, when you see the pictures of Trayvon, that he really sort of looked like a gang member. The race sort of, if you're afraid of, black gang youth, then, I guess him being black sort of doesn't really play in his favor. But wasn't he out on his bike, by himself? And I don't know. Certainly the style of dress didn't really work in his favor in terms of that profile. But it's a guy on his bike, 17-year-old riding around town on his bike in the rain getting Skittles. Like, it just, to me, it didn't really scream gang. I think that if someone were to see him in that guise, that is being, well, that guy might be a gang member, it's because you're looking for that stuff. So in terms of assessing Zimmerman's behavior, when it comes down to it, honestly, the whole race thing, I think, is such a red herring, because the Americans for many years have been going through this, with the OJ thing, right? It was like, well, black guy, what are we going to do about this? And, there have been riots related to race. We've got 40-some years of violent riots whenever something happens in a courtroom. This is why the story is interesting, by the way. I'm going to mispronounce your name. Is it Amika? Do we get that settled? This is why the media reports on this stuff. Because every time there's a race issue, a black and a Jew or a black and a white doing something in the States, and it goes to a courtroom and it gets on TV, we're just waiting to see how bad the riot's going to be when the verdict doesn't go the way some people want it to go. People went absolutely crazy. Rodney King, those cops that beat Rodney King, when they got acquitted. Well, now we got to have another trial for the black guys that threw the chunk of broken off concrete into Reginald Denny's skull. The guy driving a truck who made a wrong turn, and he gets his skull broken by some black guys doing that. Well, we got to have, if they do get convicted, there's going to be race riots. It's the whole race thing is red herrings. I think that really where the issue should have been decided and may have been decided is in looking at the conduct of Zimmerman.
Well,
I would like to think that
may,
he would have been convicted in Canada.
I was just about to echo those sentiments. I find it absolutely extraordinary that race has clouded this issue. So far as I understand, there was no evidence at all that Trayvon was carrying any sort of weapon, but Zimmerman was. Is that correct?
That's
Yeah,
true.
that's true. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Any jury in this country, I'm pretty certain, would have convicted him because they would have thought, even if he was acting in self-defense, the force that he used was unreasonable. To use a gun against an unarmed man is absolutely appalling. And
I think you don't understand.
The guy
I
was
don't
about
think
to
you saw
kill
the
him because
pictures of the injuries that Zimmerman sustained. He had 2 black eyes and a broken nose.
a broken nose.
And as I understand, when the shooting happened, allegedly, I have to say that because I don't know if this is true, Trayvon was on top of the guy, pounding him and slamming his head into the concrete. So he stated that he was in fear of his life.
Well, if they had gun control, this would never have happened. And also, if they had CCTVs in that area, it would never have happened, would it? But hey, those are 2 issues we've discussed on previous shows. I'm sorry. To shoot someone to death, as I say, in this country, because of our gun culture, I think, no jury in this country would convict. They would think that the force used was overzealous and unnecessary, unreasonable in the circumstances.
But, I mean, he didn't have any other choice, and it pains me to say this, but he really didn't, because the guy was about to take his gun, according to Zimmerman. He was on the ground, it was raining, it was dark.
That's the key issue. Let's start assessing. I'm going to try to talk DPR just to help you out. I'm going to try to talk DPR into agreeing with you that that this poor Mr. Zimmerman didn't have a choice. So let's start this movie at that point, right? So you're George Zimmerman. You're on your back. This guy's got you by the head. He's punching you. He's bouncing your head off the pavement, and you manage to be able to free up your gun, right? You don't know this guy, right? He's not your cousin. You don't know what he's like. Maybe he's going to kill you. Maybe he's going to stop then and walk away. You don't know. Is it not reasonable then to shoot him? And I asked that somewhat rhetorically, but DPR, would you agree then, like if you were in those circumstances, you were on your back, there's a guy bouncing your head off the asphalt, you've got minutes or seconds before you lose consciousness, and then who knows what, and you can manage to get your hand on a gun somehow. Would you not?
I have been in such a position, lying on the floor, having someone stamping on my head, making it hit the concrete, and losing consciousness for a brief second. If I had a gun, I wouldn't have used it.
You would not have used it. Okay, then you are going to be the toughest sell on this, but luckily it's not my point anyway. My point is everyone who feels sorry for George Zimmerman does so because they make the mistake of starting the movie at that point.
That's what I wanted to come back to, though, if I may. Because he put himself in a position that there was no need for him to put himself in. He wanted to play the big hard guy, the part-time cop, and go and sort out whatever his beliefs were about this person. It was totally unnecessary for him to be in that position. So let's start the film a few frames before you've decided to start it. He could have called the police. He didn't. He decided to take it upon himself to do it.
Actually, I'm sorry, I believe he did call the police, and they said, okay, we've taken note of it. Black guy in your neighborhood, you don't like it. We'll send someone over to take a look at it. And he's like, well, I'm following him. He's over here now. And he was explicitly told by the 911 operator, do not follow him. Right?
And he ignored that.
No, hold on.
That's not strictly true, HogTie.
He said he didn't have to follow him. It wasn't an order. He said he didn't have to follow him. You don't have to.
Well, it wouldn't matter if it was an order anyway, because 911 operators do not have the legal authority to tell people do this or don't do this. Right?
That is true.
Their communication.
It was not a 911 call.
They're not government officers. What?
It was a low priority dispatch call. So he was talking to an officer. The officer said, "You don't need to do that," right? Which is like, "Hey, you know what? We can deal with this." But he didn't tell him, "No, don't do that. Don't do that." Whatever. The point is that at least the allegation, that at least the story given, by Zimmerman is that he was getting out to check and see where the guy was going, but he was not out for confrontation. That he was walking to see, like, did he go around the house? Did he go around the corner? And that he came upon Zimmerman accidentally. Now, that, again, that's his story, which is, of course, what he would say if he actually were chasing after the guy. But if we take that at face value, he was looking for a landmark so he could direct the police to the correct location, and B, looking to tell them where he went. Just, I can totally see myself, and maybe this is my problem, I can see myself getting out of the car, like, there's a guy walking through my neighborhood, and he's cutting across the streets, it's raining, he's walking by himself. You know, what is he up to? And I call the police and say that there's suspicious character here. And they say, okay, well, tell us where he's going. And I get out of my car and I go follow, you know, just around the corner to see, like, is he doing something? What's he up to? And then you come face to face with the guy and he starts wailing on you. If that's indeed what happened, I can totally see myself in the same position. I don't walk around with a loaded gun. And to me, that is the one issue that I can't quite get past. You know, why would you do this with a loaded gun in easy access? That was, to me, the biggest mistake he made.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I was going to argue the sort of more ridiculous, like, if you're willing to accept that, you know, we're only going to assess his behavior in the moment. Because I do think he legitimately feared for his life. Whether there was a real risk from Trayvon Martin is not really an issue, because it was whether or not Zimmerman would have reasonably believed that his life was in danger. And, you know, if I took a couple of guns, let's say I put a whole bunch of guns and I covered myself up like Neo from the Matrix, and I went down to the local police station and stood there and flipped my coat open and started holding the guns out, those cops would probably react poorly. I might be reasonably convinced that my life is in danger, and so I can shoot them all in self-defense, right? I mean, now that's obviously taking it to a ridiculous extreme, but I think maybe a more sensible way to put it, in concordance just the way you did, is to say, if you're going to go into a situation that's potentially volatile, and I find it funny you say this, that why would you bring a gun? Like, bringing a gun into those circumstances is the recipe for somebody dying, either them or you. And it was not prudent on his part. And I shouldn't say not prudent, or he shouldn't have had to do it. I say it's criminal. I think that it was so obviously foreseeable that gun was going to be fired and somebody was going to be killed by it, that him entering those circumstances with a gun is the causing fact. Sorry, that's the wrong term for that. But it's the thing that touches off. Eventually somebody's going to die, which is why it's manslaughter.
Well, HogTie, well, police necessarily carry a gun. I mean, they carry a gun even when they're about to buy donuts. I mean, it's not as if Zimmerman planned to shoot this guy. It just, that's, the violence escalated, and I mean, he had no other choice. He didn't. I mean, they carry a gun in the most casual situation, so I don't see why that's necessarily a problem.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm going to agree with you that Zimmerman did not intend or at the outset set out to kill Martin, right? And same could be said of any police officer. When they get up in the morning and put on their uniform and put on their gun, they don't say, well, I'm going to go over to so-and-so's house and shoot them today, right? I mean, these circumstances develop. But keep in mind, this comparison to what a cop does or would do or would not do, sort of relative to Zimmerman's behavior, is just, it's off base, because police officers don't act the way Zimmerman act, right? They are careful to not put themselves in circumstances where they're going to be, well, by the way, to be clear, so it doesn't come up in the comments, I'm not saying that police officers never get in these circumstances. Obviously, it happens all the time, and usually it ends poorly. It ends with them shooting somebody or whatever else. But there is something to be said for them acting with legal authority. Plus, there's a distinction between, if you're approached by somebody who's identified as a police officer and you understand that they may or may not be in contact with other police officers, and your reaction is to attack them and get them down on the ground and beat their head against the ground, that's a very different scenario than in this situation where Trayvon Martin is there and he's being followed and pursued by somebody who might be an undercover cop, might be just some dude walking around, but they had some conversation beforehand. I don't think he was under the impression there was even a chance this guy was a cop. You know, you don't know if you're being followed by a cop or a criminal. I just think the comparison between what a cop would do and how we should react to what a cop would do, is it all sort of lining up with what Zimmerman actually did and how Trayvon should have reacted to what Zimmerman did?
I think that if we were dealing with Canada, he would be guilty of manslaughter. I agree. It may be involuntary manslaughter. But in Florida, the stand your ground laws would exempt him from. If you could reasonably say that he was defending himself from a physical attack that he himself did not provoke. And I think that's really what I thought the case was going to be all about, is can we prove that, you know, Trayvon actually initiated the violence? You can go up to someone and say, I hate your guts. And if they start punching you, you can use a gun if you don't have a reasonable way to avoid that violence. And I think at that point, if someone is on top of you, that in Florida, in a stand your ground state, he would not have been guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And I'm speaking just of the legal defense. If it were Canada, I agree, absolutely would be involuntary manslaughter, because it was an imperfect defense. It was a condition that he set himself up.
I don't think it would be, because if my understanding of Canadian law is correct, then it's very similar to that in England. Self-defense is effectively an all-or-nothing defense. You do not diminish murder to manslaughter by arguing successfully self-defense. You are acquitted. There's no middle ground.
Yeah. There is no, just for reference, not that anyone cares, there is no manslaughter in Canada. There's homicide and culpable homicide, and but I mean, yeah, you would, I mean, they do on sentencing, they make distinctions whether you had intended or premeditated and things like that. But no, I think DPR's interpretation is right on the money, that if it was self-defense, then it is not culpable homicide. That is, under 222, you would be, you would just be acquitted.
Well,
I see. So we do in the U.S. We do have that distinction.
How is the stand your ground law even relevant when the guy's on top of you? It's stand your ground just says that you don't have an obligation to retreat. If you see
yes, exactly right.
Stand your ground, and people debate whether or not stand your ground actually had application in this case, and it certainly does. Stand your ground. Had Trayvon Martin survived this attack, stand your ground would have been Trayvon Martin's perfect defense for killing Zimmerman, because he's the guy that went after Martin. Martin was the guy minding his own business. As soon as Zimmerman approached him in possession of a weapon, whether Martin knew there was a weapon there or not, Trayvon Martin had the right to stand his ground and to beat that guy into the pavement. That's what stand your ground does for you in this case.
But you can mind your own business, but people will still think that you're acting suspicious. I mean, if he went up to him, and if Zimmerman went up to him and asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's just, and he just said, "Well, I'm just going to buy some candy." Well, then that would be no problem. Even though Zimmerman thought he was suspicious, Trayvon Martin still could have been minding his own business, just going to the store to get some Skittles or whatever. So, I mean, it's not, I mean, you can mind your own business, and yet people will still think that you're suspicious. But if you have nothing to hide, then there's no problem.
So the stand your ground laws, as I understand it, mean you don't have to retreat. You don't have any obligation to avoid conflict once it's initiated. You can escalate it as far as you need to defend yourself. You're not obligated to unentangle yourself from whatever conflict. So if you're a man and you're a neighborhood watch person, and you confront someone and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" and they say, "Doing whatever I want to do," and punch you, and you're in reasonable fear of your life, if a jury could say, "Yeah, in your position, I would have used whatever means necessary to survive and escape, or just survive," then you would have a legitimate self-defense argument to make. And that's basically why I think the fact that Trayvon was on top of Zimmerman at the time the gun was fired would indicate that a stand your ground law would be perfectly legitimate. He had no obligation to try to find a peaceful resolution to that in any way, or let the guy beat on him. He had.
Can you help me? Can you help me with this law of stand your ground, because I don't understand it. Standing your ground. I don't know whether he was following him initially in a car and then got out of the car, or whether he was following him on foot. But what ground was he standing by? He went after this bloke and confronted him, didn't he?
It means you have no duty to retreat, and that means that, say, if someone invades your house, you can legitimately shoot them if they pose a threat to you, without saying, you could have escaped out the back. You don't have to escape out the back. You can shoot them if they're there to hurt you.
I don't think that I can't see how that would be applicable in these circumstances.
It also applies to public lands in Florida. You don't have to have no options. That's the point of the stand the ground. If you are in reasonable threat and someone initiates a conflict with you, if someone hits you, if someone strikes you or shoots at you, you can shoot back without having an obligation to retreat or disengage. And I'm saying here not morally, just legally. That's my understanding of the law.
Okay, well, let's move on to your second point, Emika.
Well, this is about free speech. I know you guys talk about this a lot, but are you familiar with Tony Miano? Anybody?
Even if we were, which I'm not sure we are, a lot of the audience may not be. So tell us the story.
He's a famous, he's a police officer who became a street preacher, and he was in the UK preaching against sexual immorality and, according to the Bible. And he was arrested because he preached against homosexuality specifically. And there is and let me just look this up real quick. But there is something in the UK that says that you are not allowed to say anything that's considered hate speech. And I mean, he wasn't.
I see that he was arrested in Wimbledon for homophobic sermon. So he was arrested in Wimbledon for hate speech. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I listened to it, and I mean, he wasn't saying anything hate. Like, I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in God or anything in what he was saying. So I thought what he was saying was really stupid. But yet, I don't think that you should be arrested for expressing your own religious opinion.
You don't?
No.
So the Westford Baptist Church shouldn't be restrained in some regards?
No, they should not be arrested.
No, I didn't say arrested, I said restrained. For example, in conducting their protests a few hundred meters away from military funerals, for example, you don't think that that's reasonable?
They can say whatever the hell they want.
Can they say it can they go into the same church as the military funeral is taking place?
Well, I mean,
Can they come into your bathroom?
Well, I mean, you own the bathroom. The bathroom is your property. The church is private property.
Right.
This
so
is what
do you think that they should be allowed to go into a military funeral in the church in which that funeral is taking place and express their views in the way that they do?
Yes.
You do. Do you think that the person that was arrested in Wimbledon, if he had remove gays and replace niggers, do you think if he was expressing those views, he should be allowed to continue without arrest?
Yes.
Well, I disagree with you. HogTie, free speech. Should you be allowed to say anything you want to?
No, certainly not. Thanks for wording it in such an easy way. I do think people simplify that question about, free speech. Should we be free or not be free? Well, of course we should be free. Of course, the context is important. I think your question was trying to guide our caller here towards, just free speech, just completely unrestrained. Well, No, you can't come in. Westboro Baptist Church cannot come into my bathroom with their signs, right? And there are reasonable limits to freedom. That's not necessarily the.
It's your property.
Okay. How about let's say they want to hold a protest on the middle of, let's say, across 3 lanes of Highway 401, half hour east of Toronto, that is blocked the entire 401.
Are they obstructing?
Okay. But they're free. But they're free to do it, or they're not free to do it. You see what I'm saying? Is, you know, you have to. It's a where do you draw the line issue. There are restraints on freedom of speech. I guess maybe more to the point, maybe what you're getting at is about the content of it. But the thing is, can they do it in the schoolyard?
Nazis be able to protest in front of the White House.
Yeah,
they should.
I don't necessarily have an issue with that either.
Why one speech as opposed to another? I mean, how do you make the distinction?
Yeah,
well,
actually, I think
this is where I was seeking to get to, but seeing as you didn't engage at all with the fact there should be any restriction, I couldn't get to that point. I think it is a balancing exercise, but presumably it follows necessarily from what you're saying that any form of defamation law you think is invalid.
I'll take that up.
Sure.
I do. I think it's completely wrong. Until speech becomes an act, until it becomes an incitement to violence, until it becomes, you're not free to say, go kill that guy, because that's clearly an act, not a speech. But you should be free to say whatever horrible, stupid, small-minded, hateful, ugly thing you want to say in any public place.
Fine. So now
up to any point where you restrict the rights of others.
Now we've got some point where, okay, if it is inciting immediate violence, you would be against it. What if it was inciting hatred? Would that be a problem?
No, that's fine. I've got no problem with that.
You've got no problem with inciting hatred, just as long as
I hate
it's not
Canadians.
immediate.
I hate Canadians, and I stand up for my right to go tell people how much I hate those maple syrup swilling bastards. And you can't stop me. That's my free speech right.
So
I can stand in the middle of the mall and say Canadians all stink.
Let's use that as an example. What if you said we should all go and kill Canadians sometime in the future?
That's an act. That's an act.
That's an act. So inciting violence at whatever stage is, in your view, an act.
Yes.
I don't understand why it's different from speaking, but it's incitement to an act. That's the way I see it. So you do see, albeit at the lower end of the scale than I do, that there are limitations, or there should be limitations on the freedom of speech.
But DPR, you're taking this too far. This is not just some guy saying that I hate this group. This guy is preaching from his holy book.
He should be free to say whatever dumb thing he wants so that we can all laugh at him and say, God, they're so stupid. All right, that's the victory that we have.
If a Mormon wants to preach that black people should not be able to marry white people, or that black people are cursed, or whatever, that's fine with me. I mean, why shouldn't he be able to? If someone wants to say that the Aryan race was chosen by God and that they descended from space in sheets of ice, I mean, as many of the Nazis believed, that's fine. And if someone says, I hope you get cancer, that's not a crime.
Well, let me try to make the point then about restrictions on speech. And I think we get too hung up on the issue about should people be allowed to say X, or should they be prohibited from saying X? And I think we can define some things where they should be outright prohibited from it. I think that defamation is a good example, like to spread a specific lie about a person or a group of people. But in any case, that I don't want to get wrapped up in that, because the point here, why I keep mentioning where people can say things.
No, I understand, Emika, that it's not the case in question. I'm not disputing that. What I'm disputing is whether you think there should be a totally unfettered right for people to say whatever they want. And I think that there are legitimate circumstances in which that degree of freedom should be curtailed. I think that we have gone too far in this country. But I don't know, let's use another example. Do you think it's acceptable for, let's say, a Christian YouTube user to make YouTube videos alleging that an atheist on YouTube is a paedophile and giving out his information and also the sources for and encouraging people to report him for paedophilia? Do you think that's acceptable?
No, because he is not. That's slander. You're spreading lies about somebody, and that person. If the police come up to that person, you're putting that person at risk to some degree, because the police are going to come banging on his house door in America, most likely without a warrant.
Let me take this.
Well, just before you do, concordance, all I'm trying to seek, Emika, is this: that totally unfettered right to free speech is not something that I think that even you endorse, and I think you've just proved it by that. And that was the only point I'm going to make. Where you draw the line, that's open to a different discussion. But at least you accept my basic principle that there are circumstances where free speech should be prohibited. Concordance?
No, I think you're mixing up issues, and I maybe this is a gap between the two continents. In the U.S., the ideas are free. You can express any idea you want to express. Now, there are certain context-specific guidelines, right, that can get you in trouble. It is okay for me to say that you, DPR, look like a pedophile. There's nothing you can do about that, because I think, that's my opinion, I can think that you look like a pedophile because, dear God, I mean, come look at you. But I can't say that you are a pedophile because I heard about this one guy, or I have testimony that this one child was molested by you. That's an actionable thing because it has legal consequences for you. That is speech as act. It is a legal action that I am taking, or an illegal action that I am taking. I'm making allegations which have legal consequences for you. If I say you, DPR, have an IQ of 57, what harm have you received? How can you say that my idea, that you have an IQ of 57, is slander, unless people would reasonably understand that and deny you access to a job?
So you're saying, basically, from what I understand, concordance, you're actually defining the laws of defamation perfectly. You can say whatever you like. A statement only becomes actionable when it actually has some provable harm on the reputation of that person, which seems to be what you're saying. So you agree with defamation laws as they stand in this country?
Within reason. You have to prove.
You have to prove damage, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. You have to prove damages. Yeah.
If it causes damage, then that for you would be a form of restriction, ex post facto, so to speak, because it's a punishment.
Yeah, it's speech as act, and I think that is where we're having the biggest gap. There are no restrictions, though, on speech as free expression of opinion or idea. So you cannot in this country tell people they can't say that black people are all great dancers. You can't tell people that they can't say that God is non-existent, right? They try, but it's the most fundamental right, and it protects all the other rights that are written down in that Constitution. If we can't complain about stuff, if we can't say the government is a horrible, horrible place, or they're terrible people, then we have no free speech. Right? Now, when you start to say specific things that have consequences, then yeah, that's speech as act. It's having an effect on other people, which extends beyond the realm of ideas and into the realm of reality, how it really affects people.
If someone wants to use the Bible to justify slavery, for example, and say that slavery is a good thing, they should be allowed to do that. I mean,
yep.
They should be allowed to say what they believe, even if it's the most vile thing ever, because
could you help us, Emika? Because whilst people have been talking, I've been trying to find on the internet, and there's all sorts of sites which link to YouTube videos, which obviously I can't really watch at the time, but I'm trying to find just a report of what he actually said. Do you happen to know the words he used that caused him to be arrested?
I actually have the
I've got it
video
here if
of.
you want.
I have the article, Huffington Post.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
About midway down, he talks about it. So he talks about the fact that he was talking from 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 1 through 12. I began my message by assuring the people that mine was not a message of hate, but of love. I was simply explaining a passage in the Bible which speaks of sexual immorality and that people should abstain from it. I did not speak solely about homosexuality as a form of sexual immorality, but also about any kind of sex outside of marriage, yada, yada, yada. I just based on what he's saying here, I have to say I'm a little shocked too.
Well, I'm not prepared to base my judgment upon what he says to a newspaper after the event. Please, people, do not get me wrong. I think there are some limitations that go far beyond anything that is reasonable. And the one that always sticks in my mind is the fact that anyone speaking out against the Holocaust, a Holocaust in Austria, is not only subject to arrest but a long-term imprisonment. That is absolutely disgraceful. But I do have a concern about when people speak in an environment where it could, and I don't think we're that far apart, Concordance, where it could have an immediate knock-on effect, or even not, if not an immediate knock-on effect, it is in effect an incitement to violence of one degree or another.
Yeah, I think there are reasonable compromises that can be made. Everyone has a knee-jerk reaction when they see when they see speech which they find detestable. But I think especially as free thinkers or atheists or rationalists, whatever, one of the most hated groups in Western society, it is so important that we defend this very precious right to say things that 95% of the population don't want to friggin' hear. And if that means that we have to stand up for Nazis and for white supremacists, whatever group you particularly hate, you can't have one without the other. It has to be extended universally, or they can come after you next, and they will come after the atheists. It's an ongoing battle.
DPR said, did you say it's against the law for someone to say that the Holocaust did not happen in Austria?
In Austria, it is. There's a famous, I can't remember his name unfortunately, there's a famous historian who is a Holocaust denier. And he actually went to Austria and he was arrested on the basis of statements he'd made outside Austria. If somebody knows, please post a comment and help me out here, but I'm pretty certain that I'm right. But was there anything else? Because we have another caller, so I would like to move on to them, but obviously I'll give you the last word, or anything else you want to talk about.
Well, I've always wanted to know, do you think that we're beating a dead horse with creationism?
First off, let me add something to a previous discussion. It was David Irving. That's the guy's name. He was a pseudo-historian, yada, yada, who's a Holocaust denialist. And Christopher Hitchens campaigned very strongly to keep him sort of out of jail and free, specifically because of the free speech issue. But the reason why we have to continue to fight against creationists, at least in the U.S., is they are in the majority. They have a lot of the political power. They have incredible financial backing. And if we are not careful, it will spell the end of proper science education, at least in biology. It will seriously curtail the awareness of science, the support for science in the U.S. And it spreads, it metastasizes. We're starting to see it in Korea now. Creationism is rapidly growing in the Korean school system, and now they're starting to have battles there. So it's very important that advocates of science who want to see a well-educated populace, and why would we care about that? Because tax dollars pay for research, because there's a market for this kind of information. Let me pass it over to HogTie.
Yeah, Oh yeah, of course it's a dead horse. Of course we're beating a dead horse, but it's a dead horse that a few very politically active people have managed to put some cables on and reanimate it a la Weekend at Bernie's and trot it out to the Louisiana state legislature and convince them in academic freedom laws for freaking high school teachers. No, I think if your concern is that, you know, we make these YouTube videos and people talk about creation and finally, you know, people have kind of made up their minds, you know, Nephilim Free isn't going to watch one of our videos and be like, hey, that's a good point, I believe in evolution now. But they're the Ken Hams of the world and who's that, the blonde woman, the Wendy Wright, you know, the concerned women.
I saw that. Did you see the interview? Did you see the
Wendy
interview?
Wright and Richard Dawkins, or?
Yeah.
She's done several. Yeah, she's done several. I think the very famous one is about 50 minutes long with Richard Dawkins. That you just, it's painful to watch. She's a woman is just so annoying. But remember, these are people that bring in a lot of money, and they have a very passionate base, and they're making inroads. And you know, the part of the reason why they're making inroads is because Americans, when it comes to the sort of sensitivity to people's religious beliefs, especially any form of Christianity, you all turn into, and this is not a compliment, you all turn into Canadians with your level of politeness, right? They don't want to teach evolution in schools now because we don't want to make an awkward situation for the teachers, making an awkward situation for students who were raised by Christians. I mean, we had people on the Magic Sandwich Show here a couple months or a month ago or so talking about homeschooling their own children because that's the only way you can get to teach evolution. I mean, what kind of chaos is evolution? Because now they don't, there's so many schools there that don't teach evolution because it's such a hot button topic. As soon as they start teaching evolution, well, then the Christian kids are all off getting homeschooled. So, you know what, let's just stay out of the whole evolution creation thing. If you want your kids to be educated in biological sciences and even in some aspects of cosmology, to get proper science education, I shouldn't say evolution, I mean proper science education, even in issues like cosmology or geology or anything of interest from general science. You can't have them learn this stuff in schools because it's the school administrators, all these public governments are too chicken shit to actually teach the science the way they used to. So secular people are now homeschooling their kids because that's the only way to give them proper science education. So yeah, it's the dead horse, but it's a dead horse that's still stinking up the room.
Yeah, I'm looking at Ken Ham's page right now, and it's just abysmal how many people are so deluded by what he has to say. I mean, people actually believe in Noah's Ark and the flood, and my parents do as well, and it's kind of sad.
Do you know what I think is the most scary idea is the belief among creationists that there is a controversy, that there is you know, even division among scientists, among those who are atheists and therefore believe in evolution, and those who are Christian and God-fearing and therefore believe in creationism. In the world of cancer research, in the world of medical research, there is no discussion. Yeah, any of these fields. It's the greatest deception they have managed to pull off is the appearance of two sides to a debate. And unfortunately, we lost that battle very early on. It was the easiest one for them to accomplish. And that's, I think, maybe the hardest battle to fight. And here, to me, is also the other big issue. You have a number of churches who officially, on paper, as part of their position statements, are not opposed to evolution, and yet 60%, 70%, 80% of their congregations are. So that's not even a matter of the official position of the Lutheran Church or the Methodist Church or the Catholic Church. The Catholics and the Methodists and the Lutherans take it upon themselves to disbelieve it. So that says to me it's not so much that it's being crammed down their throats, it's part of the mythology, and they're just not motivated enough to toss that aside.
Can I have one more question, just really quick?
It will have to be quick,
and then
hit us. Go on.
Okay, so do you think that the Thunderfoot said a while ago that the religious arguments and the philosophical arguments and the arguments from the Bible and the history of the Bible and all of them have been defeated, essentially debunked, and now they have to resort to this, and DPR is going to hate this, but the presuppositional argument. Do you think that's an admission that on some level that they don't really have anything left?
I think to a degree it is. I think that obviously they had much more room to manoeuvre their arguments in before science started closing up those gaps, and their God has become able to put in smaller gaps in our uncertainty and that which we don't know. And whilst I still think there are those that are attempting to argue that the Bible is accurate when it comes to, amongst other things, the resurrection of Christ, for example, I think that when you actually look at the arguments they're using to justify that, you realise just how implausible and useless those arguments are. And I do think that presuppositionalism has sort of like developed because it's a new novel idea. It's one that it's actually very clever in that basically it's an argument that says, well, I win unless you accept my preconditions. And you've seen this argued by the likes of Sye Ten Bruggencate, less eloquently by the likes of Eric Hovind, and even less eloquently by the likes of Vernon Fagnax. But I think it's a wonderfully desperate argument. It is not convincing to me at all. And as I say, it's one that basically means that you've got to accept my presuppositions, otherwise we can't go anywhere. And as soon as you say, okay, I'll accept your presuppositions, then you say, therefore you agree with me. And then you've got this tortuous, well, you're using your reasoning to justify your reasoning. How do you know your reasoning is correct? Well, what else have I got to go on? What else have you got?
The same thing
what else? What they say, you'll say to them, turn the question back on them and say, what have you got to rely on apart from your reason? They will say, it's been revealed to me in such a way that I know it's true. And you'll say, well, how has it been revealed to you in such a way that you know it's true? Well, it's been revealed to me in such a way that I know it's true. And at that stage, as far as I'm concerned, the conversation is over. That's why I'm just simply unimpressed by presuppositionalism, and I'm not interested in any conversation with any presuppositionalist. I think it is a desperate argument, and I think that you're probably right. It's a desperate argument because, as I say, the gaps that they have got to fill with their gods has become increasingly smaller. I would recommend that you listen on YouTube to A.C. Grading's speech, the title of which escapes me. It's got to do
God
with,
argument?
No, Prometheus. And he
set Prometheus free.
That's right. And during it, he will explain that, many thousands of years ago, there were pixies and fairies in the woods, and then people understood that these things weren't pixies and fairies, so the gods moved a little bit further away. They became on top of mountains like Mount Olympus, and then people discovered that on top of these mountains there weren't the gods, so they then sort of like disappeared into the heavens. And now that we understand the heavens, the gods have disappeared even further, so that they're now apparently not even able, spaceless, timeless, and everything. So they have no interaction
Immaterial, disembodied.
Exactly, and what a wonderful way to argue their existence. It's basically, of course you can look for them as much as you like, but they're beyond space, they're beyond time. I think it is desperate, and personally I find it very unconvincing, but hey, that's my view. HogTie.
I agree with your assessment of presuppositional apologetics and presuppositional apologists. It's just such a delicious admission that, why are we arguing from evidence? The evidence thing isn't working for us. You know what? Let's just tell them that we're right and see if that works. There's only one hope that presuppositionalist apologists could ever impress me and make me sort of nod and go, okay, that was good, was if the whole presuppositionalist movement is a joke, if it's a practical joke, because we would have all fallen for it. It's like they just sat around and go, we're not convincing these atheists, so they're just not getting it. I mean, we try to tell them they're going to burn in hell, and they're like, so what are we going to do? And then someone says, well, you know what we should do? Let's just tell them that we know we're right, and that settles it. And then when they say, well, that's circular, we're going to go, yeah, we know it's circular, and it'll drive them crazy. And so short of it being a practical joke,
talking about driving us insane, it certainly worked with Aaron when we had Sye and Eric on the Magic Sandwich show, or was it about 2 years ago now? I know Concordance was there, but it is deeply infuriating, and I think that this is how he thinks he's achieved success in his argument in any debate. It's when he gets thrown off the stage to just being troublesome, boring, and irritating and repetitive. And he gets up with this smug little grin on his face and says, "Thanks very much for your time."
Yeah.
But
yeah.
there is, as I say, I'm not the greatest philosopher. I've been criticized by some people as in the most appalling terms about my philosophical knowledge. But I'm
And
sorry,
I want to apologize that for DPR.
No, I was talking about Michael Patent, actually. But leaving that aside, you were not too far behind. I'm sorry. Maybe I am missing something. But if I'm missing it, then every single atheist I know and every single philosopher, esteemed philosopher I know, is not convinced, including the likes of A.C. Grayling, Daniel Dennett, and others. I mean,
it's not intended to convince anyone. I think that's the secret of it. They're saying they're giving up. They've given up on the idea of convincing anyone. Now they just want to win. Wouldn't that be so frustrating to go into every debate knowing that you had, this big giant target painted on you, that all they have to do is, show me the evidence kind of argument, and suddenly you're back to, well, the invisible unicorn and yada yada. And a lot of people believe it. They wanted to win. And I think that's what motivated the whole thing is let's come up with an argument where we can just define ourselves as having won already and then work our way backwards, right? That's pretty much what presuppositionalism is. Decide you've won and then work your way backwards. That's it.
That leads me on to a thought I had earlier in the week about the Kalam cosmological argument, which is another one that I think is utterly vacuous. And what is interesting, of course, is it's used by Muslims such as Hamza Sortzis to argue into existence Allah, and used by the likes of William Lane Craig to argue into the existence Yahweh. And what I find interesting is that if an argument can be used to come up with two quite conflicting conclusions, it's not a very strong argument. But there's another aspect to it, which I might even be making a YouTube video about. So we'll leave that for now. We'll come back to that perhaps later on in the show, but I think we're joined by our next guest.
Well, before I ask my question, can I make a comment about something you were talking about earlier, about freedom of speech?
Sure.
I heard about this guy. He made a comment. One version says he made it on a video game. Another one says he made it on a forum about how he's going to take a gun and shoot a school up or something like that. And at the end of that comment, he added lol JK, which means, laugh out loud, just kidding. And he got 8 years in jail for that.
Which country was this in? Do you know?
I think it was one of the countries in one of the states of America. I don't recall which exactly.
May I interject with small correction? Yes, he was a gamer. I believe he was 18 or 19 years old, and the comment somebody had said, and it was a gamer forum, like it was sort of the guys were talking and text chatting in between games and whatnot. He'd said something along the lines of somebody had said, "Yo, you're crazy, you crazy fucker," or something like that, and he said, "Yeah, I'm crazy. I'm gonna go shoot up a school full of kids and eat their hearts," something like that. Something that you wouldn't find funny.
Yeah.
But he lol JK. And apparently a woman in Canada had seen this and had called the police. I wish it hadn't been a woman in Canada, because every time someone tells this story, they go, "A woman in Canada," got all upset about it. I think quite rightly, she was concerned about it, although I think people would then say that the police there overreacted. They did secure a warrant to search the house and found nothing of interest and didn't find him to be terribly crazy. He's just a guy that plays video games like a 19-year-old. And he has not been sentenced. Rather, he's been detained pre-trial. But the thing that's weird about it is he's been there for 8 months. So just the two corrections are, he has not received a conviction, so he's not actually a criminal. He's awaiting trial. And it's 8 months that he's been incarcerated before he actually gets that opportunity for trial.
I'm always very skeptical of these kinds of reports or these outlandish claims. Sometimes there's more to it than is reported in the media, like other issues, like warrants for his arrest, complications regarding, jurisdiction. I always want to see the original sourcing, some sort of true confirmation of the facts.
Well, then forgive me for the false information.
That's okay. You had another point, though, that you wanted to raise.
Yes. I wanted to ask you a question. So I've been looking lately at the definition of the word atheist, and I found two similar yet distinctive definitions. One is that atheism is the position that there are no deities, and the second definition that I found is that atheism is the absence of belief that any deities exist. Now, I can agree with the latter definition, but the first one is less comfortable for me to accept because it almost feels like a faith-based statement. I mean, we don't know whether deities exist or not.
Where did you get the
just know
definition?
that.
Where did you get the definitions from?
Well, dictionaries. There are two different dictionaries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I would agree in general terms. I'd be interested to know what the sources are, because you can get all sorts of definitions being given that aren't necessarily respectable dictionary definitions. But I think the simplest thing to do, I mean, there's a huge argument goes on a lot of the time between agnostics and atheists, and is there a difference between the word and the definition of the word? I think that people do have a tendency to use a word in a way that perhaps doesn't follow the majority of dictionary definitions. I think the easiest thing to do is simply to ask someone. And if you ask me, I think my answer would be very much in accordance with the second definition that you gave.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, I feel more comfortable with the second definition. But I mean, it leads to a bigger question of who gets to decide what words mean. Who gets to decide that?
Well, in a way, the dictionary writers get to do it, but in another way, common parlance determines how dictionaries define words. It's an interesting question, but if there's any misunderstanding, I say the easiest thing to say is, you say you're an atheist, what do you mean by that? It doesn't take long for an answer. But rather than, I saw a very pathetic video posted by a YouTube user VenomFangX, who had gone along to, I can't remember where exactly it was. I know that Concordance will know this. He knows everything. But where they had just unveiled a atheist monument outside a courthouse. And they rabbited on about a quote that had been given, saying, the quote was, "An atheist believes," and went on, a hospital should be built rather than a church, and various other lines as well. And they just picked up on this, an atheist believes. You see, an atheist believes, therefore it must be a religion. Atheism is a religion. And it's like, God, is this as good as your arguments get? I mean, I don't know. I better stop speaking. Come on, someone else. Concordance Hogtie, who wants to pick up?
Well, let me take a run at that one, because that is one of my pet peeve topics. I think I'm going to do what you just did, DPR, and that's to say, well, I'll tell you, here's my opinion, and then just run out of steam on it, because it does get frustrating after some time. I off and on again have been a regular in Shock of God's chat room, and you do get some good discussions going in there. Depends who's present, depends what the topics are going to be. So part of kind of surviving that room, and I just offer this up as an example of really any place where you get into discussions with theists and atheists, part of being able to sort of keep your head above water in that sort of place, and by that I mean not just get banned all the time, because that happens, but is to detect in other people whether they're actually interested in conversation or they're just there to be dicks. So if I were to write a guide in how to tell if someone's a dick when they're talking to you, it's when they tell you what your position on something is. So there's several different ways you can define atheism and agnosticism. I actually don't really like the term agnosticism, like it's somehow a position on something. I mean, I think that the two major strategies you hear is like there's a spectrum, theists, agnostics, atheists, and then other people do the little 2x2 grid thing, and they say, well, there's, you know, theisms on this side and Gnosticisms on this side, and there's lots of videos explaining that stuff. But when it comes down to it, I mean, BPR's point is right on the money. Like, who cares what you think the word means? If you're having a conversation with a person and you're trying to resolve the issues between you, you say, what do you think about this? Oh, so you're saying you don't believe in God. Well, is that because you're certain there are no gods anywhere? It's very, very easy to resolve these kind of things in conversation. And I think anytime you get into a chat room or you see a YouTube video where somebody says, well, this is what atheism means, and therefore there are no atheists, and I can prove it, or they just, you know, or look, atheists do have faith, and then they play that dumb equivocation fallacy with the word faith, or as DPR was pointing out, with religion. Whatever, move on, because they're not trying to have a conversation. They're just trying to be jerks and pat themselves on the back, and maybe they think that God looks at them like they're cheerleaders or something, and they can look over the shoulder and be like, see, God, see how I made fun of the atheists? Oh, good for me.
Well, before I go to concordance on this, I actually want to bring in our next caller, who I think has got an interesting point on this issue. Are you with us, 13 Heathens?
Apparently, none of you have actually listened to the lectures done by Sye Ten Bruggencate, because in his lectures, he first goes through and explains to his audience why all of the standard theistic arguments, from arguments against evolution to creation and all these others, simply don't work. And then he goes on to say that he's come up with a greater argument. Instead of arguing for a possible God, he's arguing for a certain God, and explains that the whole point of the argument is simply to shut up the atheist, to end the argument. It's not to try and win, it's just to shut it down.
Have you got, is this on YouTube?
Yes, it is. I found it on there. Unfortunately, I don't have a link available
It's
for
all right.
it.
You send me a link after the show, and I will include that in the description of this video when it goes up on YouTube.
Cool.
That's wonderful. And you're pretty certain those are his words. It's basically just shut up.
Yep. It's in 6 parts. I watched the whole grueling, miserable thing when I first heard his name come up, and went through and listened to it. I'll have to find it again, but it is indeed out there.
I think I watched them. He was speaking. He was speaking in a church, and he went on about how teaching people about Christianity had been done incorrectly. He'd done it for years incorrectly, but he'd now found this new method. I think I got to part 4 or 5 before I gave up. So I'm glad you stuck it through to the end and actually got that bit.
It's actually around the time when he starts first talking about the argument itself. He states that it's not to convert anyone or convince anyone, but simply to shut up the atheist, essentially. That isn't the exact phrase, but that is in essence what he says, is to shut down the conversation. He also claims that every atheist he ever made the argument to went away and cried because they knew it was true. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen that, sure.
Well, he claims there are no atheists, right? That everyone believes, and there are just people who accept the fact that they believe and those that deny it.
Well, the thing is, the entire argument is a performative contradiction to begin with.
Explain in English.
Meaning what?
Oh, performative contradictions. Let me get you a proper definition before I simply pull one out of, well, someplace unpleasant. Give me 1 second here, and I'll get you a proper definition. Well, whenever you're having a discussion, one thing that comes into role is presuppositions. For example, if you were to say, my wife is pregnant, there's a presupposition that the person has a wife. When that is not correct, that's when performative contradictions come in place. These arise when the propositional content of the statement contradicts the presuppositions of asserting it. So if you're talking to somebody because they're an atheist and you're asserting that there's no such thing as an atheist, you are immediately using a performative contradiction in that initial statement. So the whole thing grinds to a halt right then, because you're talking to somebody and insisting that they know something which they do not know. So the whole argument on a technical level, on a philosophical level, breaks down right then and there. I
have to say that I've never heard Sye say that we all know that we're theists deep down. It's just that some of us don't accept it.
No, he said it. He said it to us in the call, actually, several times.
Oh, yeah. It's his, there's a God, which is the statement he claims makes all 8 people that claim to be atheists run away and cry. Literally.
the comment I always had the hardest time not dealing with, accepting, is this: could you be wrong? You know, the honest answer for absolutely anyone is yes, I could be wrong about X, Y, or Z. You know, I have to admit that in intellectual honesty. Well, then they win by intellectual dishonesty because they can't be wrong. Well, geez, why the hell are we arguing then? What was the point of talking if you already know with the absolute certitude of a schizophrenic that the voices in your head are absolutely factual? I literally mean they have the certitude that only comes with absolute madness. That's the only way you can be 100% sure of absolutely everything being absolutely true. And that's the kind of absolutes that they deal with. And again, that's a sign of mental illness.
What I was going to say is if you have all this information coming from external sources like this, and you have this absolute knowledge at your disposal, they should be able to tell us how many moons go around the third planet of Sigma 7.
Well, I think their position is...
Why would they be able to say that?
Well, they should be able to say that. If they have God giving them all this information, then certainly they should be able to ask that too.
Yeah, but God's information is obviously a one-way conduit. He only gives such information as he wants his subjects to hear. So I'm not convinced that that's a valid. Well, no, yeah, but maybe that doesn't mean that God's wrong. God could just be a bloke with a sense of humor.
Yeah, that's true too, I suppose. But at the same point, it's one of those things that I wanted to hit him with. But the thing is, if you're entering into a presuppositional argument with somebody like him, and he's willing to go with performative contradictions and completely ignore how you're supposed to use presuppositions in argumentation, I think it's completely valid for us as atheists to start off with a presupposition that he is an atheist that's simply trying to milk money off of theists, and that he's doing a great job to promote atheism in the process.
And we know because it's been revealed to us in such a way that we know.
Yes, just through his speeches, because he certainly knows how to knock down his own arguments.
We're all just sort of rubbing our temples at the whole presuppositional thing. It's just so silly. I will say, sort of in their defense, I don't know that they could answer when you say, you know, well, if you're really in conversation with God, you should be able to tell me, you know, about the moons of some planet or whatever. I think they would say in response that their revelation is absolute, that is not to be questioned. It's perfectly precise when given to them. It's absolute but not complete. Obviously, somebody who receives benefit of the revelation of the Holy Spirit doesn't get all the knowledge of the universe because we couldn't cope with that. So I think they would have a response to that. But in any case, you know, I've seen a lot of discussion lately about how to address this issue and that issue with them, and I think the main thing to do in discussing things with presuppositional apologists is to stay calm, because they're one of the few sets of Christians who actually have as a goal in a debate is to enrage you. Like I mean, it's funny because Christians on YouTube complain about the trolls, right? People who are vandals in conversation that just come to destroy the conversation. Presuppositional apologetics, at least in the modern version of it, is trolling. It is vandalism of a conversation. So, you know, it's important to kind of not let them, you know, troll you and get too rage-filled about it. I know I get, like, sometimes you'll say, well, gee, your argument isn't very convincing. And then they say, but you don't understand, I'm a presuppositionalist. I don't even have to convince you. I don't even want to convince you. What the fuck are you talking to me for? Like, that's what I sort of bail on them is this... I don't have to convince anybody. Okay, fine.
That's because the idea is to just shut you up about it.
So I want to go back real quickly to the definition of atheist thing. I think there are a lot of us out there who have chosen to call ourselves something else. You know, I still prefer the term skeptic or rationalist, just because people already think they know what an atheist is. They've gotten too comfortable reacting emotionally to what an atheist is. And I worry sometimes that in some way hurts a movement. It hurts our collective power to have everyone calling themselves, like, you know, Thunderfoot says, I'm a pluralist, right? I know a lot of my colleagues call themselves something other than an atheist, but they're non-believers. They're non-theists. You know, the nuns in the categories when they were doing demographic breakdowns. a lot of times it's not that people are necessarily afraid of the term, it's that the term means something that they don't associate with. In my case, I consider myself a skeptic because I'm a lot more, I identify a lot more with the process I use than with the conclusions that I arrived at. I kind of happen to think that my conclusions are fluid. I'm not dogmatically adhering to any particular viewpoint, but I do dogmatically adhere to the process by which I determine which is the most likely or which is the true statement about the nature of the universe. I would much rather say I use a skeptical process or a rational process to arrive at the truth than to say, and here's what the truth is, and don't argue with me because I know that this is true. But again, I wonder if it doesn't hurt us as a group to have so many disparate names.
What Curtis said is touching what I wanted to ask. You say that if you want to know what someone wins when he says that he's an atheist, just ask him. Well, doesn't that give us a problem when we address atheism as a community?
That's very similar to the question I asked, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're joined by NeoAtheist. So I know he wanted to chip in on this. Can you just mute Vaughan TV? That's great. Thank you. What have you got for us?
All I was going to add to it was that geographical location plays an intricate role in when you actually approach how you answer the question of the definition of what you consider an atheist. I mean, you have the literal definition, but the geographical location, like the Bible Belt being a prime example. I mean, there's mindsets that are preconceived down there that play an intricate role in how you approach something of this nature.
Could you extrapolate on that a little bit more?
Just the Bible Belt in general would be a great example of where religion plays an intricate role in the everyday life. And places that are like that are, you have to have a certain level of tact when you answer what you consider an atheist, or you being an atheist yourself. A certain way you have to approach it. Am I being vague with this, or should I just
Wait, are you afraid to admit to not believing, or is it a matter of the knee-jerk reaction you get?
I've actually admitted in the past in the heart of Texas that I'm an atheist, and I've gotten 3 death threats from people that were carrying concealed weapons at the time. So adds to a little of the
How do you know that they were carrying weapons if they were concealed?
They basically pulled them.
Okay, that's a good answer. So they actually pulled a gun on you and pointed at you because you said you were an atheist. Wow.
I've had this in the past.
Concordance, you're in Texas, I believe. Have you ever admitted in public that you're an atheist?
Yeah, but I'm a researcher, so most of my coworkers are pretty atypical Texans. But yeah, in those small town, it's certainly not. I'm not going to be wearing atheist T-shirts. I say that there was the atheist Vuvuzela band that were very out and open in this small college town that I'm in. And I don't know, positive and negative on that. They were very proud to be out there. They were on the con side. They were playing vuvuzelas, which was about as annoying as it can get. But yeah, of course, yeah, you don't walk in the grocery store wearing a shirt that would provoke, I'm not sure about violence, but certainly a lot of hateful comments. There's nothing that Christians hate more than people who don't believe the same thing.
I'm also in Texas, and I haven't had a problem either.
Okay, well, thank you, NeoAtheist. Atheist, I'm going to remove you. I'm going to go in reverse order. We've got to draw the program to a close. Observer, you've been very, very quiet. I apologise if I haven't come back to you. I'm sure there's many things you'd like to say.
Not really.
Okay, thank you very much for the call. That was easy. One thing I did want to, well, there were two things. Can we deal with Kalam? Just very briefly, right? Kalam, everyone's familiar with it. It's one of the spastic arguments that the theists use, particularly since it's been resurrected by William Lane Craig. And it's considered to be this wonderful example of deductive reasoning. But I was giving some thought to this, and I'm not for a moment suggesting I was the first to come up with this, but it struck me that the very first premise of this deductive reasoning was actually inductive.
Yes.
Comment, please.
Yeah.
Take it over. Go on.
I hit my mic first. It is inductive. I was saying it along with you. It's inductive. I've had this issue in Shock of God's chat room. Everything that we're familiar with, that we've seen, that's come into existence has had a cause. You know, from that we will generalize that everything that has a beginning has a cause. I mean, from there you have to. So it's definitely an inductive argument. I mean, they will. I've never successfully convinced anyone when I've explained that it's actually there. It's inductive. It'd be a fairly strong induction. I think it should apply to pretty much everything you'd see after the creation of the universe. You know, inductively at least.
Well, it
doesn't
doesn't apply on the quantum level either. But anyway, 13.
No, yeah.
Go first.
I honestly think it's really weak, because when you think about it, it's dependent entirely on a cause-effect relationship. And I have never seen anything that could be classified as a cause that isn't in and of itself an effect. And I would challenge, and I have challenged anyone to come up with anything within human experience that can be considered a cause that isn't itself an effect brought on by other factors.
If you're going to admit to having an initiation force, something out there that causes something to happen, that acts upon something, why would it necessarily have to be a supernatural being? Why can't the laws of physics be eternal, so that what's acting on stuff before the universe is universe? Why couldn't that be an inanimate force, something without intent or meaning or knowledge or intelligence or yada yada? Why does it have to be a god? Why not, what acted on the beginning was built into the structure of the nature of the universe itself? I'm not sure why there needs to be a god involved. It doesn't speak to me from the argument.
Well, that's I think a slightly separate thing. I mean, I was arguing that the supposed deductive reasoning was in fact a inductive reasoning, but this is why I think it's absolutely fascinating. As I say, that the likes of William Lane Craig can use Kalam to ultimately justify the existence of Yahweh, and Hamza sources can use it to ultimately justify the existence of Allah. When you have these two totally conflicting conclusions, you wonder where this argument is going. But the Kalam doesn't actually go that far. All the Kalam says is everything that, I'll probably get this wrong and I apologize, everything that comes into existence has a cause. The universe came into existence before the universe has a cause. I don't really have an issue with that argument. It's just the 7 steps that they take thereafter to reach their particular God that I have an issue with.
Yeah, and they're not at all inquisitive when they raise the issue either. I know I've a number of times in chat rooms and comment exchanges and whatnot got into the discussion about this notion of something beginning to exist, and they'll say, I mean, as you know, they're always wrapped up in false dichotomy and in argument from ignorance. So they'll say like, well, look, either the universe always existed or it had a beginning, and I'll say, or both. The universe began form we know it, was it 13.7 billion years ago, and it's always existed, and they don't get that. So I've had to explain to them, but would you say I have always existed? No, because you can think of a summer day in 1959 when I didn't exist. So the way that you would say that I didn't always exist is to point to a particular period of time where I didn't exist. So point to a particular period of time that the universe didn't exist. And they'll say, well, I don't know, how about 10 seconds before the Big Bang? And then, as Sye would say, thank you for your time.
Well, there's kind of a bigger issue than that, because when people think about the dawn of the universe, what they think of this big empty void, and what we're really talking about is really a null state. I mean, they're kind of asking, when they say, well, what was the universe before the universe? They're asking the equivalent of what was inside of a bubble before it was blown up.
It's not quite Kalam, but it's another one that they frequently throw up in conjunction with it. And it's this one about infinite regress. You can't go back all the way. But somehow, suddenly, these rules don't apply to their God.
I did one time ask a Christian who was really pushing that point about the infinite, the infinite regress, and you can't cross a series of infinites. And I tried to address that with him. I said, well, how tall are you? Did you used to be 4 feet tall? At some point in your life, were you 4'1"? Well, how many sizes were you between 4 foot and 4'1"? Okay, forget it. That didn't work. But okay, so God invented the universe. Was it God's idea? Yeah. Well, was it God's first idea he ever had? Oh, well, was it his 7th or his 15th? How many ideas had God had in the infinite amount of time he existed before he got the idea to create the universe? He just no. Oh, but see, God's outside of space and time. Okay, but how many ideas has God had? They just. I mean, that's the whole thing about starting with a concept that you insert presuppositionally, that itself is internally inconsistent and self-contradictory, is that it thwarts any meaningful discussion down the road, because you end up, you can craft any number of contradictions you want from there, and fact and truth don't really mean anything.
I have to explain to people watching, the Concordance has had to leave us. So thank you very much for your contribution, Concordance. I also think that the topics that we've just started touching upon may be sufficient for a show of themselves. So I'm tempted to wrap it up now. And certainly 13 Heathens will have you back on a future show to discuss and continue discussing these issues. I think they're very interesting.
That'd be fun.
But for now, thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm going to remove you, which will mean that there's just me and HogTie left. And normally at this stage, I say thank you very much to Tony, who's been working away behind the scenes, bringing this show to you in all its glory. I actually did it almost by myself this time, so congratulations to me. But thanks also to everyone that contributed to the show, including those who called in and those who were watching and commenting. I only had the live stream on Magic Sandwich Show open, so it wasn't easy for me to follow everyone and everyone's comments, but thank you very much indeed for those. As I say, this show will be posted on YouTube within 24-48 hours, and it will be available for download, if not on iTunes, then at least on FeedBurner. Go to www.magicsandwichshow.com, go to the iTunes page. I'm going to relabel that page FeedBurner page or whatever, but because iTunes isn't working at the moment, but you can download it as an audio file from that. HogTie, thank you very much indeed. Final words as I try and work out how I actually end the show. Over to you.
I do like how in Tony's stead you thanked yourself. That is good. But I hope you appreciate Tony all that much more, given the juggling that you had to do today. I think largely successful. I like the callers we had today. That was I think that really helps keep some energy and interest going on, and fun for everybody. So
absolutely. Now I'm going to try and end the show. So thank you very much indeed. This may take some time.
Oh, I'm sorry. One quick. I forgot. I just put it in the chats too. I put video recommendation. The Mudbroker, The Seekers of Purity, and Utopia. I pasted into the chat on both the channels. It's a think piece. It's really good. It's the video I wish I had made.
Links will be in the description on the videos when they're posted on YouTube, as will be the links to any other things that we have mentioned that I remember to put in, including, hopefully, that clip of Sye Ten Bruggencate saying that pre-suppositionalism is all about shutting up atheists. I so hope we can find that clip. But for now, I think I found the right button. And I think if I press this, the show will be over. So thank you very much indeed.
Right.
We'll see you in 2 weeks'